Okay, welcome to the second lecture in the series of demonstrating how Paul, as well as the book of Acts, are mocking, undermining, sort of brushing into the corner and casting into oblivion haTzadiq, James, the brother of Jesus, as well as the rest of the family of Jesus. Okay, so we are going to look at this. And this is the second series in a lecture. We are going to sort of try to clarify things that went a little bit fast in the first lecture. Okay, so this thesis, the research thesis in a sense, is that the unknown author of Luke, Acts, and also Paul mocks the appointment, the office, the leadership, and the authority of James, the brother of Jesus, on Hebrew, haTzadiq, James the Just. Good. Okay, we've looked at the literature, at the extant literature on haTzadiq. Okay, so when one is dealing with literature like this, one of the principles that one must use is the hermeneutical or the exegetical principle of dissimilarity, the criterion of dissimilarity. If one finds statements that is not to the benefit of the proto-Orthodox Christianity, the Pauline-style Christianity as it developed into the inside the Roman Empire, the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th century. If you find statements like that is in a sense 180 degrees opposite to the emergent proto-orthodoxy. In this proto-orthodoxy, the family of Jesus were unimportant, and Peter was quite important, and people like James and so forth were quite unimportant. This was the emergent proto-orthodoxy, simplified. So if you find statements such as this that we are going to look at, it is opposite the current, and therefore you don't disregard it, you in fact regard it very highly, because it passes the criterion of dissimilarity, sometimes also called the criterion of embarrassment. This is embarrassing for the kind of orthodoxy that developed in the church, and therefore you you have a very high regard to it, because it is opposite to what one would expect if you were to believe, the things that are current, the commonly believed legends and so forth. Okay, haTzadiq, his appointment and stature. The chronicler Hegesippus, 110 to 180 CE, quoted by the church father Eusebius, lived from about 260 to 340 CE. In Historia Ecclesiasticus, History of the Church, wrote as follows about haTzadiq, James, in Dutch and Afrikaans Jacobus, the brother of Jesus. Okay, so the full reference is given there. Jacob, the brother of a master, succeeded to the government of a kahal, of an assembly, in conjunction with the apostles. He has been called haTzadiq, the just, Latin justice, by all from the time of a master to the present day. He was consecrated from his mother's womb, and he drank no wine nor strong drink, nor did he eat meat. Okay, now that we come to this fact that haTzadiq did not eat meat, this is very important. In books like Galatians, letters like the letter to the Galatians by Paul, Paul basically says that yes, that he knows that haTzadiq and that there's three prominent leaders in the city of Jerusalem. But he makes it clear that what they means nothing. What they are, their status, their stature, means nothing to him. So he's in insubordination towards them, and he has no regard for their halakha, for what they say is right and wrong. And in fact, he uses every opportunity to subtly sort of like push a dagger into their backs. Now, it is a fact that haTzadiq was at least a vegetarian, if not a vegan. And so he did not eat meat. So Paul in 1 Corinthians and also in Romans 14, he makes a point of saying that those who do not eat, those who eat only vegetables are weak, or those who are weak eat only vegetables. That is not very well hidden stab at haTzadiq. No razor came upon his head. He did not anoint himself with oil, and never used any Greco-Roman public bathhouses. Okay, so in the Greek and Roman culture, the body was very highly regarded, and people pampered their bodies with perfumed oils and hot water bathhouses and stuff like this. Yaakov would not come near places like that. At the simple rural lifestyle, where you don't allow yourself all things that in later times would be called petite bourgeois self-indulgence. On Russian, molku bourgeoisnoy, self-indulgence. Okay. Yaakov alone entered into the Holy of Holies of a temple in the city of Jerusalem, for he wore not woolen but white linen garments, and he was in the habit of entering alone into the Beit HaMikdash, into the temple, and he was found upon his knees begging for the forgiveness of the people of Israel, so that his knees became calloused like that of those of a camel, in consequence of his continually kneeling on his knees in his avodah of Hashem, in his service of God, and asking forgiveness for the people. Because of his tzedakah gedolah, his exceedingly great tzedakah, me'od, justice, righteousness, he was called obleas, which means in Greek pillar and bulwark of a people, as well as the tzaddik, the justice, righteous, in accordance with what the prophets declare concerning him. So, a tzaddik is a cherished concept in the way of Israel. The tzaddik is seen as a protector of a people. For example, in the book of Bereshit, in the book of Genesis, Abraham is begging the Almighty to spare the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah for the sake of the tzaddikim living in there. And first, over 100 people, then spare it, and when it comes down, but it doesn't become less than 10. So classically, a minyan in the Derech Israel, when people can pray the prayers of Israel, is 10 people. It comes from the account of Abraham begging the Almighty to spare the people of Sodom and Gomorrah for the sake of the tzaddikim living there. So the tzaddik is a protector of a people. He serves as a bulwark of a people. If there's a city and there's a decree against the city, that the city should be destroyed, but there's tzaddikim living there, that evil decree can then be held back for 5 years, 10 years, until the tzaddikim are maybe dead, and then the destruction of a city would come. So this is the principle of a tzaddik, seen as the bulwark, as a protector of a people. Okay, and also what we see here is that the people believed that there are prophecies in the Tanakh, in the Hebrew scriptures, that can be applied to tzaddikim in general and to haTzadiq in particular. Okay, so this is about the appointment and the stature of a tzaddik, specifically in this case, haTzadiq. Okay, so don't think at this stage in history that you're dealing here with Christianity. If you study the community of haTzadiq as well as their writings, it is very clear that you're dealing with purist Tzaddokites, that you're dealing with a branch of Judaism, very orthodox, very clean, cleaving to the Torah of Moshe, And the whole fact that this is seen as a new faith is part of a hijack that took place in history. And in the series of lectures, we are going to deal with that hijack. Okay, so Yaakov haTzadiq, the second point here, is as the appointed successor of Jesus. Okay, Eusebius, the church father, wrote as follows about Yaakov haTzadiq and his history of the church. Then there was Yaakov, who was called the master's brother, for he too was named Joseph's son. This Yaakov, whom the people of old called the just, Hebrew tzaddik, Latin justice, because of his outstanding tzedakah righteousness, was the first, as the records tell us, to be elected to the throne of bishop, of overseer, of the Kahal in Jerusalem, the ecclesia, the assembly of the Evyonim, Netzarim, Osei HaTorah, Kanaim. There's several names for this group. One of their self-designations was the Evyonim, which means the poor ones, people who are deliberately leading a simple life. They don't pamper themselves in luxuries and so forth. They are living by dictums of sleep on the floor and eat your bread with water. These are the dictums, the self-awareness of a Evyonim. When we come to the term Netzarim, Netzarim is a reference to Yeshayahu, the book of Isaiah, chapter 11. This is a Davidic concept. This is a concept that there is a belief and there is a hope that a great leader from the house of David would rule over the people, and that the illegal usurper rulers like the Romans and the Herodians would be lose their power, that they would be beaten and driven out of the land, and that a netzer, a choter, a netzer, the tzemach, from the house of David will take the throne and will rule in Israel. One of the terms for themselves are also the Osei HaTorah. This is probably the term that has been rendered to Essenes, the Osim. Osei is just the connective plural or the plural construct form of Osim. And the term Osim is probably what led to the difficult to decode term Essenes. Osim means the workers, people who are the doers of the Torah, of the instructions by the directives of the Almighty. And these people are also Kanaim. Kana is a reference to being passionate, being zealous. And one of their self-designations is also the zealous ones, or the zealots, or the passionate ones, the Kanaim. There's some strange portions, for example, in the books of Mark and Matthew that doesn't make any sense, where Jesus goes to visit and he is socializing with people who are said to be Canaanites. At that stage, Canaanites didn't exist for a good 800, 700 years or so. There was nothing like a Canaanite left. The term for a Canaanite in Hebrew is Kanaanim. The term for a zealot is Kanaim. So Kanaanim and Kanaim is just about the same word. And that is the origin of that misunderstanding. Okay, so Eusebius also wrote, there were men having the name James. There were many men that had the name of Yaakov. Yaakov, of course, is a very common name amongst Bnei Israel, the people of Israel. But this one, the master's brother, was kadosh, set apart, consecrated for a purpose from his birth. Everyone from the master's time until now has called him haTzadiq, the righteous. And because of his unsurpassable tzedakah righteousness, he was called righteous and oblias. He was called haTzadiq and oblias, which is the tzaddik serving as a protector of a people. Now, tzedakah is not an abstract concept, it's a very practical concept. Tzedakah has got to do with social justice. It's got to do with seeing a beggar and you've got X amount of money and this person has got DX just about nothing, and you see the person is hungry and wretched and destitute, and you assist the person. Tzedakah's got to do with, you are introduced to the state president, and 5 minutes later you are introduced to a person who is a cleaner, but you treat them with exactly the same level of respect. You don't sort of like shun the poor person who's got a lowly, humble job. You, if you can, just almost like bow before the person, make the person feel important. Don't treat a poor, humble person with really poor and no education. Treat that person with the same level of respect as a professor or a person with 3 PhDs and so on. That is the concept of tzedakah. Okay, the 2nd century Syriac apostolic constitutions states that Jesus personally appointed his brother Yaakov as his successor. Yaakov was the brother of Jesus and the one appointed overseer of the assembly in Jerusalem by the master himself. Again, these things clash with, to some extent, with emergent proto-orthodoxy, and therefore by the criterion of embarrassment or the criterion of dissimilarity, these passages should be taken very seriously, because nobody gained anything, nobody gained status and nice appointments and so forth in emergent the pyramid of dominance hierarchy that was emerging in the emergent proto-Christian church. Okay, so statements like this, very important. The theologian Rudolf Bultmann was he did good work in the sense of developing and vocalizing the criterion of dissimilarity. The way that he used it is antiquated, it is outdated, but still the basic concept is very important. Nobody gained status or appointments by saying things like this, and therefore you take it very seriously. Okay, in his history of the church, Eusebius wrote as follows about the election or appointment of haTzadiq as the leader. Yaakov was the first, as the records tell us, to be elected to the throne of overseer, bishop, of a Jerusalem kahal, of the assembly, of a grouping. Those who have heard the voice, those who have heard the call, they constitute the kahal. Okay, so he was the first to be elected to the throne of overseer, to the leadership. Okay, now the Aramean church in their quarter of an old city of haTzadiq in Jerusalem, they have got a building. Or they have many buildings, but one of their buildings, in the inner chambers of that building, is a replica of the literal chair, throne chair, on which haTzadiq sat. He was seen, and his self-understanding was to be a placeholder for the great Davidic king and his reign, which these people believed would come soon. When the heavens would be torn open and an army of angels would come and help the tzaddikim. So that was at the heart of the apocalyptic worldview of that time. And it's vocalized very unforgettably in the war scroll found at Qumran. Okay, so according to the Gospel of Thomas, one of the Nag Hammadi documents, knowing that Jesus would soon depart from them, his Talmudim, his disciples, the disciplined learners, that is the meaning of the term Talmudim. Today in Israel, if you walk past the school and you see the school children, then your tour guide would tell you, where are the Talmudim? Okay, so it's got to do with people who are learning from a senior person. His Talmudim asked him who would lead them after his departure. His reply was as follows: Logion, word number 12, Gospel of Thomas. And Yeshua said to all of his disciples, in the place you are to go, go to Yaakov haTzadiq, James for righteous, James for just, for whose sake heaven and earth were created. So once again, what we are seeing here is tzaddik theology, in the sense that the cosmos is not seen to exist just for the benefit of cockroaches. The purpose of a cosmos was, it was created so that later tzaddikim would come forth and devote themselves, and it's for people like Yaakov haTzadiq, for whose sake heaven and earth were created, and therefore the worldview behind this also says that if all tzaddikim are obliterated from the earth by evil people, then great destruction would also come, because it's the tzaddikim who's holding back the judgment. There's a white fire hanging over the earth, and it threatens to come down to scorch the earth. And it is the prayers of children and of tzaddikim who are holding this band of white fire that is exceedingly hot, keeping it away from the surface of the earth. Okay, of course it's not literal, but this is what the tzaddik are doing. It's in the merit of a tzaddikim where the heaven and earth were created and are protected. Okay, so in Acts number 1, we observe a very odd election. Okay, so what has happened is that Jesus is at this stage dead and gone, and when your leader is gone, the first point on the agenda must be to get a new leader. But here we are led by the nose down the garden path, and we are told that the disciples said, "Oh, we are not 12 anymore. We are 11. We can't handle not being 12. We must be 12." So instead of appointing and electing a new leader, they are pictured as being in agony because they are 11 and not 12. And so what we are told here is that they immediately want to appoint person number 12. Okay, so why on earth 12? It's a concept that you don't meet in the letters of Paul. In 1 Corinthians 15, there is an interpolation that was not originally part of a letter written by Paul, where the concept the 12 is mentioned only once, but it's very clear that that's an add-in. It's an orthodox interpolation. The concept 12 is unimportant in all the letters of Paul, which are the oldest document. You know, the letters of Paul started in about the year 15, they ended, around about the year 58 or 59, 60 or so. So they span about a decade, and they are the oldest document. Then the Gospel of Mark emerged, towards the year 75 or so, and the book of Matthew 85-90, towards the year 100, the so-called Gospel of John. And then the Gospel of Luke, in its final form, dates from about 140 to 150. There were proto-Lukes that were used and possibly existed since about the year 95 or so. But the final form of the book of Luke dates from about the time of Marcion in the year 150. Okay, so the oldest documents are the letters of Paul, and there's not really a concept of the 12 there. So this is a concept that we all of a sudden see in the Gospels. The only logic to the 12, to the concept of the 12, would be that Yeshua, being an apocalyptic revolutionary, that he assembled a shadow government in the form of 12 disciples that acted as a shadow government, and that he assembled a shadow Sanhedrin in the form of a 70. This is for example, one of the, in the books by Professor James Tabor, you will meet these concepts. But the concept of a 12 is not met in literature prior to about the year 75. Okay, so the fact that the disciples are pictured here as being in agony because they are now 11 and not 12 doesn't make a lot of sense. If your leader is gone, he's now invisible, non-available, then the logical thing is to get a new leader as soon as possible. But now we are meeting some strange coded language in a sense, where the author is portraying himself as an enemy of the family of Jesus, and they propose two candidates: Joseph, called Barsabbas, who was surnamed Justice, and Matthew, Matthias. Now, in the Gospels, you meet this Matthew, Matthias person, and he's there portrayed as being a tax collector. In German, a Zollner. In Afrikaans, a tollenaar. In Dutch also. Okay, so this fact that Yeshua is pictured as gathering around himself a group of close disciples, and one of them is a tax collector, is in terms of a historical setting absolute madness. Absolute madness. The whole country was in revolt and up in arms against the Roman Herodian tax farmers, the oppressors, the people who came from the outside and took the country for themselves and were sort of placing an immense tax burden on the people. In about the year 6 CE, there was a massive revolt under Yehuda HaGalili, or Yehuda HaGolani, against the taxation of the people. So all these stories in the Gospels about Jesus being so pally and friendly with the tax collectors is part of the psychological warfare against this liberation movement, because that the gospel material was written as pacification literature, a psychological warfare literature against the movement and the family of Yeshua, of Jesus. Okay, and then these disciples here in Acts 1 are pictured as praying and casting their lots, and the winner is Matthias, the tax collector, and the loser is poor Joseph, called Barsabbas, who was surnamed Justice. Okay, so what is going on here? Righto, so let us analyze this election. Point number one: many reliable, independent early sources testify that the entire Jesus movement were daily immersers into cold water, daily bathers, Hebrew Baptists. They were Sabbas or Sabaeans. In describing this practice, the church fathers used the term Hebrew Baptists, daily immersers. A daily immerser was referred to as a Bar Saba. In, for example, in the Clementine literature, Peter is pictured as immersing himself every morning at the time of sunrise in cold water and wearing white linen and eating in a separate at a separate table and not eating with his Gentile followers, because he is keeping strict kosher and they not. Okay, Yaakov, a brother of Yeshua, can be called Yaakov Bar Yosef. In other words, James, the son of Joseph. In the writings of the church father Eusebius, for example, is said to be the son of Joseph. Yaakov, a brother of Jesus, was known as Yaakov haTzadiq. In other words, James Yaakov was surnamed haTzadiq. The Latin term for tzaddik is justice. In other words, Yaakov James was surnamed Justice. In old school imitative magic, also known as Voodoo, an often used witchcraft method is to write the names of hated opponents backwards. The name Daniel can, for example, be brought to nothing by writing it in a reverse letter sequence as Leinat. In one of the book on the Nazis, the Nazis in about 1936 sent missions to Tibet with their crazy racial doctrines and ideas and so forth. And there the Nazi delegation met with the lamas and with people close to the Dalai Lama at that stage. And one of these guys were caught having put in his boots under his feet the name of his opponent written, not written backwards, but written in normal forward language. And he was then dealt with because he was doing this imitative magic voodoo on the name of his chief enemy and his chief opponent. So it's a very ancient sort of a imitative magic voodoo witchcraft principle that you find all the way from ancient Iceland, ancient Norway, Africa, the Far East, Tibet, the Buddhists there. Wherever you go, you will find people engaging in imitative magic. This is the first or the classical attempt by humans to sort of try to manipulate the cosmos was through imitative voodoo kind of magic. Okay, so in this kind of this style of witchcraft, the name of Daniel can be brought to nothing by reversing it from Daniel to Leinat. Okay, let us illustrate the technique of linguistic voodoo. Once upon a time, and a very good time it was, there was a moo cow, and another moo cow, and a nice and goodly man called Farmer Daniel. Okay, so for those of you who are well read in literature, you'll know that the first 2/3 of the above sentence, the first 75% of the above sentence, is an adaptation of the first sentence in James Joyce's classical book, A Portrait of an Artist as a Young Man. Now, I was reading Joyce quite avidly in high school, and that was for me a beautiful sentence. Once upon a time, and a very good time it was, there was a moo cow and another moo cow, and a nice and goodly, and now comes the things that I added there, man called Farmer Daniel. At an agricultural show in the Western Transvaal in South Africa back in 1985, Farmer Daniel was awarded a grand prize. Leading and Best Farmer, Western Transvaal, 1980 to 1985. But Daniel had enemies who gradually grew in power. In the year 2010, after his father's death, Farmer Daniel's son Ben is reading in the annals of the Agricultural Society of Lichtenburg. There's no mention of Farmer Daniel winning any prize, any award. There's only one short paragraph that stresses that at the 1985 agricultural show, a certain irritating non-entity called Leinat the Loser was chased off the showgrounds. Daniel's son Ben is greatly perplexed by what he reads. After a few days, he starts to think that the name Leinat sounds like his father's name, spelled backwards. He realizes that his father's sworn enemies wrote the annals of the Agricultural Society of Lichtenburg, and that they wanted to blot out his father's memory from under the heavens. But Ben does not write or preserve any of his insight. He's just not a man of words, and this is lost. So in the year 2050, 2060, after his father's Ben's death, Farmer Daniel's grandson, Klein Benny, Little Benny, Ben Nakaton, is reading the annals of the Agricultural Society of Lichtenburg. He reads one short paragraph that states that at the 1985 agricultural show, a certain irritating non-entity called Leinat the Loser was chased off the showgrounds. Good stuff, Klein Benny, Little Benny thinks by himself. Jaag die sleg donder weg. chase away that useless scumbag. Okay, so what we have is that the winners write history, and they often succeed in damaging history severely, thereby blotting out good men and their great deeds from history. Okay, so now look carefully at Acts 1, verse 23 to 26. The author redactor of his pro-Pauline propaganda document willfully, I guess I left out a L there, staged a cunning unhistorical drama in which Joseph Bar Saba, surnamed Justice, is the loser in an election, while a character who is a tax collector, in other words, an obedient Herodian collaborator and commendable passive agent of a Roman Herodian tax farming oppressor regime, this Impimpi, is sarcastically staged as being the winner. The name of a loser, Joseph Bar Saba, surnamed Justice, is just pure linguistic voodoo for the name of a beloved brother and personally appointed successor of Jesus, the revered Yaakov Bar Yosef haTzadiq, James the son of Joseph, the daily immerser, the Bar Saba, known as the Tzaddik, in Latin, justice. In other words, history is replaced by poetry that is designed to obscure and mock. Okay, so over here we have a diagram of history. The history was that the successor, the leader, for 30 years was Yaakov Bar Yosef haTzadiq. And the poetry is that the loser in the election was Joseph Bar Saba, surnamed Justice. So it's clever, mixing the name, inverting things. It's mocking him. It's basically telling the family of Jesus, listen, we've got the literary power. We can write. You guys can't write. You've been chased into the deserts. We will write history that will override what happened, and the whole world is going to believe what we write. And so this is a tragedy. This is also a crime. Okay, so Professor Robert Eisenman, after realizing this and writing about this in the book James, the Brother of Jesus, he was professor for 10-20 years or so at the California State University, I think in Long Beach, in California, in the USA. Wrote a lot of books on the Dead Sea Scrolls, and he had tremendous insights. Okay, so Prof. Robert Eisenman is writing as follows. Here, two aphorisms, two wise sayings suggest themselves. Poetry is truer than history, and it is so if you think so, or it is so if you believe so. The first has a clear connection to the development of the New Testament documents that have come down to us. If the Gospels represent the poetry, and truly they are perhaps the most successful literary creations ever written, both in terms of their artistry and the extent of their influence, then their authors were the poets. It was Plato who, comprehending the nature of the ancient world and their love of believing the poets and not the historians, not the facts, better than most, wished to banish the poets from his ideal state. Not without cause, because in his view it was the poets who created the myths and the religious mysteries by which the less critically minded lived. For Plato, this was a world of almost total darkness. Okay, so if there's a religious system that tells you if you believe this XYZ stuff written by poets and social engineers and forgers, then you are saved. And if you don't believe this bag of nonsense, then you are not saved, then that is a very unhealthy tradition. And it's time to distance yourself from a tradition like that. A sound tradition to be in and to plant yourself in is a tradition where there's a quest for truth and not a quest for myths. And because the quest for myths is a world of almost total darkness. Okay, so light is truth and myths are darkness. Okay, so a close reading of a text will sort of expose the fact that you're dealing with social engineering documents that are mocking great people. Okay, so that is it. So interim conclusions at this stage is that the book of Acts was authored by a sworn enemy of the family of Jesus, in particular an enemy of haTzadiq and also Simeon bar Qelofah. Okay, just to preempt a little bit what we're going to say about Simeon bar Qelofah and so forth in future lectures. When haTzadiq, when James, the brother of Jesus, was murdered, technically, in the year 62, his brother Shimon, his brother or half-brother Simeon bar Qelofah took over the leadership. Simeon bar Qelofah is a person who was active in the years 25, 30 and so forth. He was already quite active. He was a zealot, probably. Is known as Simeon the zealot. Shimon ha-Kana. And in the Gospels, a puppet figure has been created, namely James, the son of Zebedee. Now, James, the son of Zebedee, has got the substance of a piece of paper that is 1 or 2 micron thick. He's an absolute flat character. He's a figure that was created to obscure the real Jacob, the real James, namely haTzadiq. Likewise, Simon Peter, there was a historical Simon Peter, but Simon Peter was blown up to be much bigger than he really was, to obscure the brother of Jesus, a member of the Jesus family, namely Simeon bar Qelofah. The Jesus family members who became the leaders in succession of this movement after the year 30 was first of all haTzadiq and then Simeon bar Qelofah and then other leaders. They were known as the Desposenoi. And they were the Desposenoi basically as a result of persecution by Rome and centuries later by the emergent proto-Orthodox Church. They basically had to relocate and flee deeper and deeper into the deserts of Arabia, more and more towards the Persian Empire, more and more towards, the south of Israel, south of present-day Jordan, in northern present-day Saudi Arabia. This is where they had to flee. Muhammad, for example, he met and he was in close contact with an Ebionite, one of the followers of this form of Judaism, really. Not really a form of Christianity, but this form of Judaism that one can call purist Tzaddukites, or the Evionim, the Ebionites. And this person had a reasonable influence on Muhammad. The name of his Ebionite was called Waraka ibn Nafal. Okay, so these poor people had to flee deeper and deeper into the desert regions. They were always poor and not very literate, and they didn't have a lot of authors. And the emergent proto-Orthodox Christian Church basically just wrote them from the face of the earth. They produced documents at a rate 100 to 1,000 times faster than these poor illiterate Ebionites could do. And the victory was, as Prof. James Tabor makes it clear, it was almost a purely literary victory. The followers of Paul, and Paul himself, sorry about this, wrote their opponents to death, into the ground. Okay, second point here is that a fundamentalist reading of the book of Acts in particular, and the New Testament in general, is not ethical. It is a betrayal of the memory of brave men of stature. If you have a fundamentalist attitude of believing that these texts dropped out of heaven as a literally word for word inspired word of God, then it is untenable. It's social engineering literature. They were written by the sworn enemies of the family of Jesus, more or less followers of Paul, who brought forth psychological warfare against the Jesus movement and the family of Jesus. Okay, so the notion that the text of Acts in particular and the New Testament in general is inspired Holy Scripture is wrong. We are dealing with cunning, social engineering and psychological warfare against the family of Jesus and their movement. This is the nature. Professor Andrew Gold is a professor of astrophysics, specializing in finding planets in other solar systems. He's at the University of the Ohio State University in the USA. Now, in the around about the 1990s, late 1990s or so, he wrote a review of Professor Eisenman's books, James, the Brother of Jesus, as well as the New Testament Code. And in it, he says that these documents in the New Testament, the Gospels and Acts, these documents are not a precipitated oral tradition. It's not that it's an oral tradition that was from this person to this person. There is an element of oral tradition, especially in what is known as the Qelofah or the Q document. But the core material, for example, in around which the Book of Mark was constructed, is social engineering, pacification literature, as well as psychological warfare against the zealots, against the people who were sort of like wanting a Davidic ruler to rule over the land of Israel, and wanting the Romans and the Herodian puppets, who were very cruel and very immoral people, wanting them out of the country. Okay, so from the year about 170 BCE until the year 136, 137 CE, there was a total of like in the order of like 66 insurrections, uprisings, and three actually major wars against first the Greek oppressors and then later the Roman oppressors. So this was all these wars and uprisings cost the Romans and later the Herodians in our land, which we can talk about, hundreds of billions of dollars, trillions of dollars. It was extremely costly. A lot of lives were lost. It was bankrupting the empire, all these kind of like uprisings in faraway corners of a Roman Empire. And so as a result of all these uprisings, it was vital for pacification literature to be written, and for psychological warfare literature to be written against the zealots, against these freedom-loving freedom fighters. These don't view the zealots from the Jesus family so much as people who were like arming themselves to the teeth, wanting to have a military uprising. The way that they engaged Rome was via holy war. And one of the holy war documents written by the followers of haTzadiq was the War Scroll. And in the War Scroll, it is very clear that these people are banking. They are pinning their hopes on the heavens opening and an army of angels coming to their assistance and winning the war. So this was a classical holy war where on earth, the people engaged in holy war, they made a domain that was physically as well as spiritually very pure, in the hope and in the trust that the holy angels would find a place on earth where they could put their feet down in a domain of purity, so that a new world order would come to the world and that a Davidic king would rule. And so this hope and this movement was a thorn in the flesh for the Roman Empire. And this is why this psychological warfare documents and social engineering documents, like for example the Book of Acts, as well as a lot of material in the Gospels. In the Gospels, the Jewish disciples are, especially in the book of Mark, they are portrayed as idiots, and they just don't get it. But the Roman centurions and the Romans get it. They can say, oh, this is the Son of God. This is the Son of God. But the poor disciples, they're just idiots. So this is like literature where the Gentiles who are triumphant is sort of like doing this, like mocking and marginalizing the Jews who are disappearing from any sort of a leadership role on the world stage. So it is a kind of literature that is been bringing that is brought forth to marginalize Judaism and to replace it by a new faith that is very attractive to the Greco-Roman psyche and that is obedient to Roman rule. Okay, so this is the essence of the psychological warfare documents. We are going to look at in these things in much more detail in coming lectures. And let's have a look. This is the end of this lecture. Righto, thank you very much. I hope recording went on. Yes, it looks healthy.